5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee agenda. Today is June 22nd, 2020, and we have 2 reports, and we will just go over the minutes of the previous meeting, looking for someone to adopt those meeting minutes.
I'd make that motion.
Okay. No questions, concerns. I call the question. All in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. So the reports are Ms. Karbuszewski. You've got 2 of them. How about you take over now?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So good afternoon, committee. The first report is a brief update on 2 bylaws and 3 policies that were identified as meeting the priorities of this committee. Based upon the priorities list of this committee, administration did reach out to several city department managers and requested information on existing bylaws and policies within their service areas that aligned with this committee's priorities, and asked for any current plans or current future plans to bring forward any amendments and or new bylaws and policies for council's consideration. It was also asked for anything within the bylaw or policy that may be of potential interest to this committee. And based on the responses received, the following 2 bylaws and 3 policies were brought forward for you today. Bylaw 1064, being the business licensing bylaw, was brought forward for discussion at the June 9th Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee meeting, and a number of amendments were up for consideration. Based on the discussion held at that committee meeting, committee did direct to administration to bring back a report by October 1st. Administration is currently in progress of working on a new business licensing bylaw and also a vehicle for hire bylaw as a separate bylaw from the current business licensing bylaw. And the intent is to bring that vehicle for hire bylaw back in September. And this particular bylaw was actually addressed and discussed at a council meeting held in February. And at that meeting, we had a delegation come forward and bring issues and concerns to council. Council then did direct administration to bring forward the stakeholder engagement information in a report identifying the issues and how they will be identified in a new vehicle for hire bylaw to be brought forward to an appropriate standing committee. The Protective and Social Services outstanding items list now houses this direction, and it has a potential reporting date of September 15th. Bylaw C-1328 is the building bylaw, and it was also brought forward to the Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee meeting held on June 9th, and contained specific information, including a draft bylaw amendment addressing a number of amendments. And committee recommended that council give 3 readings to that bylaw amendment, which was then passed at the June 15th City Council meeting. Policy 100 and 101 are also being reviewed within this report. These 2 policies are deal with council remuneration, event attendance, and expense reimbursement. And since January of this year, the Council Remuneration Review Committee has been doing their work on updating the current policies, and they are proposing an amalgamation of current policies and procedures into one amalgamated policy. And they plan to bring this forward with their report to council as early as July 13th. So at this time, there is work being done on that policy and that report, but it is not ready for council's review. We do meet this coming Wednesday, and at that meeting, we will be able to establish a reporting date and for this information to come forward to council. Policy 112 is the corporate sponsorship policy, and administration is currently working on presenting an amendment that would modernize these documents and align the information with organizational objectives. The outcome of that information may result in recommendation to repeal the policy 111 on souvenirs. And this information will be brought forward to the appropriate standing committee by the end of Q3. So the bylaws and policies that were just outlined for this committee for information are actively being worked on and or have had work done on them. And with that, administration requests this committee receive this report for information.
Thank you very much. Any conversation amongst my fellow colleagues on this committee?
Sure, Councillor Toole. So appreciate that there's a lot of work going on bylaws and policies outside of just coming to this committee. It's good to see that work is ongoing. So Arlene, what does this mean for sort of for the rest of the work of this committee and prioritization? Like, what's going to be the next things that we'll see at Bylaw and Policy Review Committee?
Thank you through the chair. That will be determined by the directions this committee sets out to administration. Okay,
so then, and that's not on our agenda today, is it? Like to determine what the next things will be?
Well, it might help this committee to set direction based on the next report being presented.
Okay.
All right. Dylan, do you have anything to say?
Move we accept for information.
That's what I'm looking for. All right. All in favor? Thank you very much. And we'll move down to the next item, which is Policy 124. Policy Procedures and Internal Directive. Ms. Karbaczewski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So during the last Bylaw and Policy Review Committee meeting, which was held back in April 28, committee discussed formalizing the reporting process that administration should use for this particular committee. And this process would generate a formal report that would provide recommendations, background information, and analysis to justify any recommended actions for committee's consideration, including new proposed bylaws and or amendments thereto of bylaws and policies. And the formal process that administration felt this committee was looking for is the similar or the same process that is currently being used to present this type of information to our standing committees. And in order for this committee to formalize that process, their administration is requesting that this committee consider Policy 124, which establishes a policy on policy, as well as establishing this committee particularly as the committee for which this work should receive. So in plain language, this policy would authorize this committee to review bylaws and policies and procedures, taking that work off of the current standing committees and giving it to this committee with the intent that this committee would then formalize a schedule of meetings that administration would then be able to rely upon to effectively bring this information to this committee. So right now, as this committee sits in this informal setting without a real meeting schedule, the process doesn't support current established reporting requirements that administration relies upon and that aligns with the formal protocols that are set out for standing committees. And without a formal policy and meeting schedule specific to this committee, administration will continue to use established protocols to draft and present bylaw and policy items through the appropriate standing committees as directed by council and committee. And this could potentially result in the underutilization of the committee as it sits in this format, and or duplication of reporting through this committee, then in through standing committee, and then on to council. So an alternative to approving this policy would be to actually continue to support the current established processes that see this type of work going through our standing committees that administration relies on, and disbanding this committee. So draft bylaws and policies, including amendments when appropriate, would continue to go through the standing committees, and any directions from council and committee would be recorded on the appropriate outstanding items lists, with delegation of that work signed accordingly to administration, and reporting dates effectively recorded to ensure that administration is meeting the needs of the organization and the needs of our council. This minimizes duplication of work and helps support red tape reduction by streamlining, continuing to streamline our process. And with that, I am open for questions.
All right. So any questions from committee members?
No.
Mayor Given?
Yeah, so I think maybe not a question so much as not necessarily disagreement, but I'm not comfortable with the direction that this is suggesting. Because if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like all new bylaws or all new policies would come through this committee first and then out to the standing committees or then out to council. Am I interpreting it correctly, Arlene?
And through the chair, the intent of policy 124 would be to formalize the process of bringing bylaws, policies, and any supporting amendments directly through this committee, for this committee then to recommend for council to do some work, or to give 3 readings, or to receive for information.
So where would the initial policy development happen in the model that's proposed here? Like particularly looking at the policy approval process. It says all proposed or revised bylaws and policies must be presented to the committee before being brought before council. So that, and the sentence before says it can be developed at the request on recommendation of council committee. So just kind of walk me through, a council committee has identified a need for a new bylaw or a new policy or revision to either one. They flag that and then send it over to the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee that then does work on that. And then it goes from the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee up to council, or back to the standing committee, which recommends it to council, or like I'm just not quite clear on the flow.
Thank you, through the chair. And as this committee is established currently, that is the question. We are finding as administration right now difficulty in determining what should come through this committee and what should just continue to move through the standing committee. So the policy 124 is intended to, for lack of a better term, draw the line in the sand. If a direction comes from a standing committee or a direction comes from council, which currently happens, instead of the motion directing administration to report back to the appropriate standing committee, with regard to bylaw and policy, it would be to report back to the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee. So this committee then would see the reports that are being requested that are formal, with supporting documentation and analysis, including recommendation and background on what to do with regard to that direction. So we are taking the work out of the standing committee pool and we are putting it in the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee pool.
Mr. Galante, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, just to give you a little bit of context on this kind of a conversation, we discussed a lot with legislative services and the other directors about the main intent of this committee, and we met a few times initially, and we got pretty much the three key items: the definition about the policies or bylaws with $1 million kind of impact on the community. The other item was those bylaws or policies which govern the city's interface with external customers via formal application. And finally, the bylaws or policies which administration would identify as ready for repeal because of age, mostly, and not applicable to these times. So pretty much now the question is, what if council or a committee, at the end of the day, council wishes to take a look at a particular policy or bylaw? Let's give a complicated example. What about if council wants to take a look at the snow and ice control policy for any reason? That will be a motion probably, and direction to administration to review specific items, whatever it is, accumulation of snow or different things. The same could be for fire, in terms of response times, etc. So we get our marching orders from council via motions, resolutions. So and we have the marching orders on these three items: the $1 million impact, the forms, and the old bylaws. So those marching orders for these three main themes may have come as well from a council motion. So not necessarily we need a policy and bylaw committee to give us some marching orders about what we need to review. So we're struggling a little bit about, trying to understand the main function of this committee and the overarching theme that we don't want to duplicate the work. So if particular policies or bylaws, if council feels the need to review something, do we need this particular committee? And if the answer is yes, our recommendation is to formalize this a little bit better, similar to a standing committee. So we can have, schedule and do through a vetting process as we do with other reports going to the other standing committees. And that's okay. We started this a little bit more informally, and depending the direction you want to go, then or we disband the committee and all the marching orders can be a council or committee under the outstanding items list, or we formalize this committee if you see the need of that. That's kind of the overall context and our own hesitation as administration to to decide and wanted to bring this to your attention for discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Mayor Given?
Yeah, so Kevin, I think it's, I guess my hesitation is my hesitation is that I think the way that I was thinking about this was in terms of governance practice of ensuring that the city regularly reviewed its bylaws, reviewed only, and not necessarily because of an issue, but as a good regular practice. Like, even in that first round, we found that there were a number of bylaws that obviously nobody had looked to ask whether they were relevant or not in many, many years. And once we started this process of reviewing them, they immediately jumped off the page to everybody involved and said, well, we don't need milk pasteurization bylaw anymore. So that could be removed. And there's some reason why that hasn't happened over the last 30 some years or 40 some years that was allowed to sit on, because there was no regular governance practice of checking in on the bylaws. And so I'm struggling with how to sort of describe the difference, but I don't see this committee's work as being a issues-based review of bylaws. Like, I think council certainly has that authority. They may refer something, but I'm really hesitant to take away the role of council and committee. If we start to remove policy development and bylaw development from standing committees, I'm not really sure what we're going to have left to do at standing committees, because we don't do awards of work anymore. There's a ton of stuff that we've given administration more authority over. If this committee all of a sudden becomes way more influential and powerful than I was imagining it, I mean, I think it will have influence and always imagined that it would, but this seems to this would be the committee, that would be second only to council in ability to influence the way the city operates. And I'm not, maybe that's what council wants. I know that there were some important issues that council wanted to see reviewed, and they were issue driven. I thought that this was a reasonable sort of approach to getting at those while doing an overall sort of setting up a practice of regular review. And I think that's why it's, the name is the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee, not the Bylaw and Policy Development Committee. So that's sort of, in my mind, that's how I've been thinking about it, is this, and it's a good idea to regularize it, I agree with that. If we regularize it, it would be, if I was summing up the responsibility, the City of Grande Prairie acknowledges that it is good governance practice to regularly review bylaws and policies to ensure that they continue to be relevant, period. And the city strives to review all policies on a 4-year cycle. Kind of making that bit up, but that would be the work of this committee, just to make sure that, okay, yeah, we've reviewed them. Yes, they're still relevant. Oh no, there's nothing. And I see that as different and distinct from, hey, there's a big issue with the business licensing bylaw, or the land use bylaw, and this committee needs to dive into the nitty gritty of the business licensing bylaw and hear from home builders and all that other sort of stuff. Like that, I think that's still appropriate at standing committee. So I'm curious what Kevin and Dylan were thinking, how they had seen this committee, because I'm a little bit leery of what's proposed here.
Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, and I'm similar to you. I've kind of pictured this committee as facilitating the process of bylaw and policy review, not actually necessarily doing that. So the revisions that have come through this committee have been all pretty common sense revisions. Yeah, we don't need milk pasteurization. Yeah, we're not doing anything groundbreaking with the playgrounds policies, and I'm very comfortable sending those to straight to council. But I think if we were looking at a policy such as our transportation levy policy is a policy that's probably long overdue to be reviewed. And if it needs significant revision, I don't think I'd probably support a motion send revision straight from this committee to council. I'd probably be asking, hey, can this be done at our regular standing committee? And I'm kind of picturing, I think that we should have a governance process of every policy gets reviewed every 4 years. So every council term, every policy doesn't get a formal report, doesn't necessarily get changed, but at least there's a few members of council that at least read it and know it exists and have a chance to go, holy smokes, we should do something about this if it needs that. And that's probably a process that could probably usually actually be done through the standing committees. I don't think this committee is necessarily needed long term. I've just kind of seen it as we haven't had that regular practice. We need to figure out what that regular practice looks like, and we need to clear out the backlog. And then I've kind of pictured this committee probably being done after we've got through that backlog.
Okay. Well, my opinion was very similar to the both of you. I think that if we made all the decisions, the rest of the council members would probably be very disappointed because they don't have their 2 cents worth in, and taking away something that they're committed to on a committee to make decisions. And if we took that away from them, they would probably be a little upset. Starting off right off the bat, yes, it was supposed to be, I felt all the way along, it was a policy review committee and not a development, as well as words that Mayor Given had said. So I would still like to go through the policies that we have, and I know we've probably got quite a few that may need to be reviewed, but to develop them, I'm not too sure that this is the committee to do that. So I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but I think this is a big committee. It could be, but when we talk about policies and bylaws, I think that's where all of council needs to be there to put in their 2 cents. So committees, that's what they're for. This is maybe we do only meet twice a year, or maybe it's 4 times a year. I'm not sure. But yeah, I don't want to make this the sole committee. Absolutely, I don't want that. So, Dylan, go ahead.
I'll know where a lot of this, or it sounds to me where this conversation is coming from in terms of formalizing it, is the issue of how do you get reports through this, and the workflow of reports, which are more formal than how this committee maybe started. And I wonder if there's a different misunderstanding that. So my understanding of when we talked about the parkland bylaw last week and last time, and why there was conversation coming out of that of saying, hey, we'd love a report on something like this in the future. My understanding of that was more because there were so many changes, and even though they were all pretty common sense, not controversial, there were some substantive changes to that, and it would have been useful to have a report for that issue because there were so many changes. But I don't think that when we had all of those ones that were just clear milk pasteurization, I don't think that anybody wanted a report for milk pasteurization to be repealed. I think that as I look at some of these, again, I'll pick on the transportation levy report. If administration brings that and their suggestion is, hey, we don't actually feel that this needs any revision at this time, or it needs revision of here's a few grammar things, or we feel it should go to the Infrastructure Economic Development Committee. If it's not, I wouldn't feel that those kinds of things need reports. I just feel that so I wonder if that might be part of what we need to figure out is if this committee continues as is, what do we mean by direction last time where we had the conversation around, hey, this would have been nice to have a report? Or is that actually something that we're expecting a couple of reports get made every time we meet? Or that's kind of an abnormal thing that we're expecting a report? I don't know.
I sent Arlene a. Sorry, Kev, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bill.
Well, yeah, I sent a message to Arlene, and sorry, Arlene, sort of, I guess I'd be under the table or leaning over and ask a question, but so I don't know if did we ever develop a terms of reference for the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee? Okay,
Yes, through the chair, the terms of reference for the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee was approved in December of 2019, and so this committee was established in January, and we did amalgamate the terms of reference for this committee into our new boards and committees bylaw last month, and it was established as an advisory committee.
Mm-hmm. And did we say, like, I'm sorry that I don't remember, you know, I'm expecting somebody else will, maybe somebody that's on the screen, but did we actually specify, you know, the purpose of the committee? Because this procedure, you know, policy 124 really identifies this committee as doing a bunch of work, and I'm curious if that's consistent with what we actually had in the terms of reference that this committee, you know, took on what feels like a really large role.
I'm just pulling up the terms of reference I'll share with this committee once it loads, so that we can review, so that this committee can review. Sure. Sorry for the delay. And so with regard, I think, to administration took the discussion held at the last Bylaw and Policy Review Committee about bringing forward formal reports as a direction that this committee would like to see more formalized process. And it, of course, my computer is froze. My apologies. It's what drove the proposal that you see today about Policy 124 and giving this committee somewhat more authority that would allow administration to bring you formal reports.
Go ahead, Horatio.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up a little bit what the mayor said about in those three categories, the $1 million, the forms or applications, and then the all bylaws ready to repeal, the issues or no issues. If we classify that in that way, the to bring forward to council to repeal all bylaws not anymore applicable, that could be a motion directly to direct administration to do that on a regular basis. And so every 6 months or every quarter is one motion from council, say administration, please sweep this bylaws regularly. They did 70 or 80 policies we have on the bylaws, identify anything no longer applicable, and bring it back to be repealed. The other two, the $1 million package, different policies or bylaws under that category, and the forms or applications, that is more issue-based. So is there an issue with the fire response times? Or is there an issue with the snow accumulation on as an ordinance control? If council detects that, or we detect that as administration, we're having difficulties with, you know, fire response or whatever it is, then do we bring that to whom? To this committee for review? Wait, identify that policy or a bylaw, or we just bring this to a standing committee, or do we bring this to council? That's a key question that we would need some clarification on how you see this happening. Thank you.
All right, I think everybody's got that on their computer.
And Mayor Given has
sure,
a question.
Well, and so did Councillor Bressie, Chair O'Toole. So,
go ahead, Mayor Given.
Okay. Well, so I think the city manager's sort of question, those 3 points, I think we developed them as a screen when this committee started its work. You know, sort of reasonably administration of saying, okay, so what do you want to do? We've got a whole bunch of bylaws and policies. Where should we start? And so I think that those were intended to say, okay, well, what we're engaged in is a review of all city bylaws and policies because it hasn't been done in a long time. We have to figure out where to start. Here's how we're going to start that process. If we had a policy on City of Grande Prairie policy on bylaw and policy review that said all bylaws shall be written in such a way that they incorporate a date for review, you know, or all bylaws and policies shall be reviewed once per council term, you know. Then we wouldn't. It would just be by date order that they would get reviewed, I think. But because we didn't have a policy like that, we had to come up with some way to figure out where to start and what was of most interest. Yeah. So you know, and if I'm looking at the mandate there, it does. It's pretty specific. I mean, it's pretty specific to review existing city bylaws and policies, and it really doesn't say anything about creating new or being the first part of a process of new. It is really explicitly to say it check stuff, review things that are already in place. And I guess we could have done, you know, to add a regular review, but weren't necessarily. I think we're thinking of this as more of a form and fold, you know, committee that would go away at some point. Yeah, sorry, that's sort of just roundabout comments. I'm curious what Councillor Bressie had to say.
Yeah, and I know that yeah, thank you. Sorry, and I know that I was never picturing. I wasn't really picturing this committee as a tool of administration in terms of, hey, we need to get something done, and we need to see if council got support. We need to work with council on it. I really have been seeing this as a tool for council in terms of, I forget how many bylaws and policies we have, but the city's a big, complicated machine, and it's all driven at its heart by bylaws and policies. And well, to be frank, if I haven't read every bylaw and policy, I know that no other member of council has, at least if they're on their first term. And I think that that's something that when these are at the heart of it, I'd hate to see there being. I know there's been a few times where I've dug into a policy and there's been times where I'm looking for one policy and then I notice, oh, right next to it on the list, we've got another policy about this that I've never heard about. And I start reading it, I go, oh, that explains why I've been frustrated by this process I've been at the city, because it's right there in the policy. They're doing exactly what council told them to do, just council told them to do that 15 years ago. And so I shouldn't be frustrated with administration for this. I should be frustrated with council. And I think and I've just run into those by happenstance. I think that for me, this is just a part of good governance, is making sure that every new council at least has an opportunity to become aware of the bylaws and the policies they've touched. Since we haven't done that, I think our council's has got work to do. But I'm not picturing this as being, hey, we're adding this extra spanner or this extra check onto the work that's already happening in the city. I think really this is the council's got a bit more work to do, and this is our tool to get the work of just good governance caught up on.
So I'm just gonna pipe in here. Horatio and Arlene had mentioned that this was to reduce red tape. That was one of the reasons why they were thinking of having one committee. And we're saying that we want to keep this committee as a review committee, and any new policies or bylaws that would be created from our regular standing committees would be basically produced under those committees. Am I reading that correct?
Yeah, I think so, Councillor O'Toole. I think the other, you know, another way to look at it is that on some boards that I'm on, you know, they have a practice, a standing agenda item. At the end of every agenda, they review one policy. You know, and so if we were to take that as sort of a literal, just sort of apply it at the City of Grande Prairie. So every regular city council meeting, just the same way we have delegation business and correspondence, we'd have policy review. And we would, every council meeting, look at one policy and say, okay, yep, that's relevant. Oh, it needed these changed or whatever. Like, and there would be a cycle on which everyone would get there. Now, we probably don't have enough council meetings in a term to do one every council meeting. You know, I think in terms of bylaws and policies, there are more than we have council meetings in a term. And so I think that process is probably the simplest, but it won't be the most effective because we just wouldn't make it through everything in a timely manner. So if we weren't going to do that, then we could. Another way to do it would be to have, you know, to add a review clause to every bylaw and policy, and then have it show up on the standing committee that's responsible for that bylaw or policy when its review time comes up, which is not unreasonable. It would actually not require any additional committees. You know, or we can have this committee that when those review times are triggered, they come here to the committee to say, have an opinion, oh, this actually needs some work, or oh, this isn't relevant, or whatever else. I think any one of those are fine. We probably just have to talk about what's most practical for our organization and the way we operate. But I think the common thing in all of those is that these are review as a part of the governance role of council, so that we don't get a chance to put things on set it and forget it, like has happened, you know, just over the years, and that happens in lots of organizations. All of those different three approaches are ways to systematically ensure that things get reviewed on some kind of regular basis, even if it's only once every 4 years. And I think that's the biggest thing that I think I'd like us to have a policy on. Like that would be a really significant change. Like if we had a City of Grande Prairie policy review policy, which sounds almost as silly as this one where we have a policy on policies, but a policy review, bylaw and policy review policy that said everything has to be reviewed once every 4 years. I kind of really wouldn't care where that review happened. It could happen at council, which probably isn't practical. Could happen at the standing committees, which is pretty practical. Or we could set up a special purpose committee, being this one, to do that. Yeah. But for me, the larger framework here feels a bit unnecessary when I think we're asked. I don't think there's a problem with any bylaw development or policy development. I think that's happening just fine, or felt like it had to me. The step that we've been missing in our governance was reviewing them regularly.
Yeah. And just to go along with you, Mayor Given, the library board usually has about 4 policies per meeting that you go to, and they reviewed them. So they were ongoing year after year after year. And I remember we reviewed them, and it wasn't that much, about a year later, we reviewed them again. So they didn't have a lot of policies, but they also did maybe 6 or 7 at every meeting. So with that, and I'm just thinking the dinosaur museum that I was on the board, we started doing that, and the new CAO decided that wasn't going to happen anymore, and we developed a committee for that. And I like the idea of having a committee for sure. I don't want to see this one disbanded. I think it's got its role to play, so it's not like we're not a non-functioning committee, but we just make sure that we're doing what we said we were going to do, and I think we would be okay with that. I still think that the rest of council would still like to have their little bit of role to play in the development of policies and bylaws. So I'm perfectly okay with keeping this going, and administration bringing us 4 or 6 or whatever it is, 10. There's some low-hanging fruit there that just needs names changed and dates and that, and then there's some more, I would say, more complex that we could do. So is that all making sense, administration? Arlene?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'm hearing this committee would like to see is focus on a regular review of current bylaw and policy that allows council to participate in the process, and that the policy that has been proposed is too large of a mandate, and that perhaps this committee would like to see this policy amended and or brought back to this committee as a bylaw and policy review policy, as opposed to a policy that gives this committee overarching authority over the development of bylaw and policy. Is that something?
Yeah, I feel that you got it. Still want to keep this committee, and we still want to have the standing committees involved. And this policy, the way it's proposed now, would give us too much authority. Just keep it the way it was initially intended. So I have support. Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think what I'm hearing is if the policy were to focus more on identifying perhaps by date, review dates required for current bylaw and policy, that it would allow administration to be logical about bringing these documents forward for review, as opposed to just picking random policies and procedures for this committee to review.
Exactly. Yeah. Good. Any other feedback that we need to bring up at this point in time? Go ahead, Mayor Given.
Yeah, so Arlene, would it be helpful then if we framed that as a motion for you? Yeah, would that be helpful if we framed that as a motion, asking you to do some work and bring something back for us on this?
And it would give administration focus, absolutely, to bring back a report and proposed policy for this committee to discuss and consider.
So I'm just thinking about how to phrase that, and so I'm happy to do this as a team effort. So I'd move the committee direct administration draft a policy to ensure the regular review of city bylaws and policies, period. And so that's still, like, I'm not saying that it has to be regular review through the Bylaw and Policy Review Committee or through the standing committees or through council. Like, there's still, I think, those three different options, and we kind of think about what makes the most sense. Administration can also think about what makes the most sense. But I think the point of the policy is to ensure that, you know, at the end of this term, one thing that we've left the new council is this policy that will at least make sure that everything shows up for them on some kind of defined basis, which we would select define through the policy. Like, we could say the policy is that every bylaw must be reviewed every year. We probably wouldn't do that, but we could. But you know, we can define that in the policy, and then that will happen. Just as Councillor Bressie was saying, you know, he was seeing behavior in the organization and not knowing where it came from, and then eventually finding out, whoa, that's because there's a policy that guides this. In this way, if we have this kind of policy on reviewing policies and bylaws, it should just become a regular course of business that happens. We get to define how that will happen, but the point is that that regular review will be ongoing even past this council. And council and committee still have the authority if there's and administration have the opportunity and authority if there's a deficiency identified or an issue that's identified that needs to be addressed, then that can happen outside of that cycle, of course, you know, and to be responsive. But we just know that we will never leave a bylaw, you know, for 15 years again without sort of looking at it or considering whether it's relevant. So that my post-amble was pretty long. I think I got the motion pretty concise, but I don't know if it was exactly right. So Councillor O'Toole, Councillor Bressie, if you had any thoughts on the motion.
So did you want that reviewed in the council term? Like one complete review during a council term?
Well, at this
4 years?
at this stage, I'm not defining that. My motion
No.
right now was just asking administration to go away and do a draft policy.
Yeah.
And there's probably a little
Yeah.
blank in there somewhere that we can put in that cycle, you know, once every blank, and we can have a discussion about what the right fill in the blank is.
Okay, Mr. Horatio?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So one question just for the team. I believe we have about 85 or 89 policies. What about the number of bylaws? Somebody can risk a number about that, just to determine if it's a 4-year cycle, it's a 2-year cycle, just to have a rough idea about where are we sitting. I don't know if Lorna or Arlene, you guys will have an idea about the number of bylaws.
Thank you, through the chair. Lorna would be better able to respond to that question.
Gotta unmute myself. We have at least 75 to 100 bylaws, or possibly more. There are some, you know, like financial ones that aren't in my book, but are on the website. But I mean, at least over 100 for sure.
Okay.
And that is policies and bylaws?
No, that's just bylaws. Hold on, I'll see what I can get for policies. Just bear with me.
So something I'm looking at is I'm just looking at the I'm looking at our bylaw directory on the website, and we've got 21 pages of 10 each, so we've got 210. But a bunch of those are outline plans and area structure plans. So maybe we tweak the motion to say, I don't feel the need to review outline plans regularly. Those get set and left. So maybe it's excluding ASPs and outline plans.
You're okay with that, Mayor Given?
Well, yeah, I think that's the type of thing when we see it, when we see the draft policy back, we'll go, okay, how would we want to scope this down a little bit? Yeah, because, you know, the things that guide land development, we don't get to just change those, you know, for no reason. Yeah, so there's probably some way to describe the class of bylaws that we mean. I don't know whether it's statutory or non-statutory, but yeah, there's probably some way to describe it.
Or we got about 30 road closure bylaws too. I don't think we need to review those.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot that, as you said, you know, road closures, there's the borrowing bylaws, there's area structure plans, outline plans. There's a lot that are on the web that council has approved. So we've put them on the web. In regards to policies, there's probably about the same amount. There's probably about 75, and that's not including procedures. So there's more if we look at procedures, but generally it's a council policy, the city manager is the one that would approve any procedures that are related to the policy.
Thank you very much. So Mayor Given has got a motion up. Any more comments from my colleagues?
Just one quick question. Do we want to add the part about the area structure plans to the end of it, or no?
No, we'll deal with that next time we meet, I think.
Okay, is it all right if I read it just to?
Yes, please read it, please.
Okay, committee direct administration to draft a policy to ensure the regular review of city bylaws and policies.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you so much. And we'll move on down to, let's see here. I think it's outstanding items list now. So, Bylaw Policy Review Committee outstanding items list, June 22nd. Ms. Karbaszewski, who would be in charge of this?
So the outstanding items list as it's presented still contains directions for administration to bring forward 3 to 5 bylaws and policies for this committee to review. We will also include the new direction to administration to draft policy on bylaw policy and review. It will, I anticipate, based on this committee's decision on when the next meeting will be held, you will see a draft policy at the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much. Guess we need a motion to adopt the outstanding items list as presented.
Make that
Thank you
motion.
much, Dylan. Thank you. All in favor? And that passes. With that, is there any other things that need to be discussed at this meeting today? I see nothing. Arlene?
Councillor Toole?
Yes.
I just wonder, I wonder if we should talk about next meeting date. A month from now would be right in the council break. And so maybe we want to go, recognize we've asked for a new policy to be written, to be drafted. Maybe we want to go, I'd suggest we go a little bit over that and start like in the second week of August, rather than being sort of strictly a month from now.
Yeah, no,
maybe that's
no, that's good. I think we're getting a meeting date given to us here right away. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair. I propose August 11th, which is a Tuesday. That is a week of a council meeting. So August 10th would be City Council, and no meetings would currently be scheduled other than this one for the 11th.
thank you very much. Everybody in agreement? Dylan? Yep.
Yep.
Sounds like we're all good for it. Thank you very much. And with that, we will close the meeting off and stay safe.
Good
Thank
job.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cool. See y'all.
Bye.